Hello and welcome to the I Am Woman project, where every week we have deep, thought-provoking and interesting conversations with thought leaders, change instigators, rule breakers and creative minds who think differently, sparking creativity and inspiration. Our special guests on our show cover a variety of topics just for you, and they share their personal stories to inspire, motivate and empower you, our listener. The I Am Woman podcast is produced for your enjoyment, and show notes are found at www.catherineplano.com. Come back often and feel free to add the podcast to your favourite RSS feed or iTunes. All links are in the show notes. Now let's get into the show. Today we have the inspirational Sandy McDonald. Sandy is the director of Get It Right Online and founder and CEO of an international charity called Create Care Global. Sandy is also a TEDx speaker, Tell Your Story, Save a Life, for which she received a standing ovation, is based on this very experience and explains how your story can enrich, change or even save lives. After 22 years running a successful marketing communications company, she used purposeful blogging to build a global community that works to help the millions of children orphaned in Africa, enabling millions of micro acts of goodness that gives everyone the potential to be a global citizen. Sandy is also the author of Get It Right Online, Build a Clan and Supercharge Your Business details the framework to do this. She believes that clarity of purpose and principle is an elixir that paves the way to a paradigm shift, changing the business experience to what matters most and how to make a difference in people's lives. Let's tune into Sandy, who is known for converting a complex online world into practical but life-changing steps for business owners to supercharge their business and their lives. Welcome to the show, Sandy McDonald. How are you?
Good.
How is Get It Right Online going?
Oh, it's in, as business often is, it's in constant growth and transition. So I'm moving from a place where I was very, very involved in communications online to being a little more spread across the communications remit, because a lot of my work now is taking me into offline communications, but with a view to how that works online.
How did you come up with a name? I love it. It's so punchy, right to the point.
Well, like all these things, it's a long story, but I wrote a book, and initially the book was called Clans, as in community. And I have an accent, which most people will pick, because I come from Zimbabwe. And I'd say what the name of my book was, and people would think I was saying the word clowns, which was definitely not what the book was about. And the book was really about the process that I had unpacked when I built a very large online community. And I'd come up with 7 principles that I felt were immutable principles if people wanted to do the same thing and go online and create a community. And so I realized that what I was talking about was how to get it right online, because ultimately, if you're online, what you're trying to do is connect with other people, the right people, and offer them what they need and create a community. That's how the online space works at its very best. And that's how I came up with the title.
So how did you build your community right from scratch?
About 10 years ago, I suppose, my husband and I had been running a marketing communications company for 22 years at that stage, and things weren't going quite the way we planned for a number of reasons. And I was looking at the internet for a way out. I'd been a graphic designer for a long time. I didn't want to do graphic design anymore. I'd just come to the end of that particular era of my life. And I'd been fascinated by the internet since it sort of started. And so we went to an internet marketing seminar. And it was one of those seminars where you, at the end of 4 days, you kind of have your credit card ready and you're prepared to pay anything because they're going to offer you the secret, you know. And so, but we didn't buy anything, but we came back with our eyes spinning because with so many ideas. And then really not long after that, my aunt came to visit from South Africa. And she told me in passing that she bought blankets and kept them in the car to hand out to children that she found alone and cold on the side of the road at night. And I was absolutely appalled because, I mean, here in Australia, one child found alone would be headline news. So she left, and not long after, I was mucking around on the internet trying to find an idea, trying to find a purpose, trying to find a reason for doing something. And I suddenly came up with this idea, well, if I went and asked knitters to knit a square and send it to my aunt, she would then be able to buy blankets rather than make them. It was such a simple idea. But I didn't really know what I was doing at the time, to be honest. I fiddled around on the internet and sort of started to find my way through and understand a little bit at that stage about search engine optimization. And then I realized I needed to do some research because I couldn't sort of ask these knitters to do anything unless they fully understood why. And I started to find out about this issue of children that have been orphaned because they've lost their parents as a result of HIV/AIDS in Africa. And the statistics were absolutely staggering. That was 25 million children have been orphaned or abandoned or are made vulnerable in some way. And the more I read and the more researched, the more passionate I became, the more focused I became. And I started to tell the stories of these children and what was happening and saying to the knitters, you know, you love knitting, you just got to knit for these kids. And it took off. It created a viral explosion, I suppose is the way you would call it. And today the squares are still arriving by the tens of thousands. I think my aunt told me the other day that we're at about 1.2 million squares.
Wow, that's so amazing, Sandy. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's an incredible story.
It's an amazing story. I've got goosebumps listening to you. So, Sandy, before we got on the call, we were talking about we were talking about TEDx talk, and I was asking you, how did you get onto TEDx? So you said there was a bit of a story behind that. Would you like to share the story with our listeners? Yes.
I did a business course and I went out for coffee with one of the people that we'd been doing the business course with. And I was in a pivoting stage. I didn't really want to build websites anymore, which is what I was doing. And she was asking me about my background, and I think I told her the story that I've told you. And she said to me, "That's a TEDx talk." And I said, I think you're on drugs. There's no ways I'm getting up on a TEDx stage. And then about a year later, it's funny, she challenged me. She said, you really ought to. About a year later, I was in a sort of 1 day, half a day workshop, and the person running the workshop was John Yo, and he is the Melbourne TEDx curator. And I didn't think very much of it at the time, but the host of the course said, "Look, I'm going to ask you all to do a talk, and in 3 months' time, and I'm going to ask John if he'd be kind enough to come back and listen to your talks." And I decided to take a punt. I just thought, well, what harm would it be if I created and wrote a TEDx talk based on my experiences of this extraordinary story and delivered it in front of John. I really wasn't thinking there'd be any outcome. I just thought it would be a good challenge to do it because, like many people, I was absolutely terrified of public speaking. So he arrived and we all delivered our talks, and I got up and did mine. And I noticed almost from the moment I opened my mouth that he was watching. I had a few slides, and he was very intrigued by the whole story, and he came up to me afterwards and said, "How would you like to tell that to a worldwide audience?" At which I nearly fainted. And there it went, and so I did. And there were 1,000 people in the audience that day, which was extraordinary.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and I got a standing ovation, which was even more amazing.
Well, I mean, you're changing and even saving lives, so it's amazing, absolutely amazing what you do.
Well, I can't take credit for it all. I started it, and I definitely poured an enormous amount of passion and a huge amount of energy into it, as did a lot of my two daughters and my husband, and my aunt in South Africa, who's just done the most incredible work with volunteers actually putting the blankets together and distributing them. And of course, the online community themselves, who've basically run the show, since 2012. So it's like all these things. It's acting on an idea, maybe is the thing I could take credit for. And being brave enough, I suppose, to do it and run with it, even though it probably wasn't the wisest thing to do financially. And then perhaps looking at the community and seeing the people that were rising like cream and auspicing them to do the work. So I just can't take credit for it all. I think in all good things, it's a team.
Yeah, Sandy, what you're doing is amazing, and obviously you're very passionate about what you do. So let me ask you, what drives you?
My family. My two daughters, my husband, my two daughters, and my two beautiful grandchildren who are just 2 and 1. I had no idea what a gift having grandchildren would be. I think when you have children yourself, you are so busy sort of being a parent that you don't take the time to stop and watch this wonder of a human being coming into the world and growing and learning. And they fuel me with energy. So they've given me not only the energy to be the best possible grandparent I can be, but to do more with my life than perhaps I'd thought I might do, because I want to give them a legacy. I want to leave something for them, the world, in whatever way I can, that will inspire them or contribute to their lives in some way. So they drive me.
Yeah, and it's so true, Sandy. You hear that all the time, that as a parent, when you're busy working and being a parent, you probably don't have that time to sort of pause and sit back and appreciate your children as much as what you would as a grandparent or grandmother, grandfather. And you do hear that quite often. Yes,
and I feel it's an extraordinary gift, and not one that you can take for granted. Not every parent is fortunate enough to be a grandparent, or as fortunate as I am, which is to have my 2 grandchildren within very close proximity. So I see them pretty much every day.
Well, an amazing grandmother. I mean, surely your children and your grandchildren, I mean, they must look up to you and have a look at what you've created globally.
Oh, I think they've got the full measure of me in all my aspects, warts and all.
That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing by the sounds of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Sandy, with the benefits of hindsight, what would you have done differently in your life or career?
I'd have stuck with my ideas, Catherine. I know that very often, if you're a creative person, and I have a creative background, there is a tendency to have many, many ideas, and that's not a bad thing. I have a name for it. I call it multiple possibility disorder. And I think it's multiple possibility disorder when you actually do a little bit of work on every single idea and you don't actually realize an idea to its fullest extent. So really the goal, perhaps the greatest regret I've got, is that I didn't fully understand the whole concept of purpose. And I think if I had, there were at least 2 or 3 ideas that were honestly great ideas well before their time and would have got incredible traction online if I'd fully understood my purpose and therefore stuck at them without being distracted by other stuff, and also letting my, that troublesome little lizard brain that we all have get in the way and saying, nobody else is doing this stuff. What makes you think you can succeed at that? And because I just wasn't driven by purpose at the time, I didn't keep going. But I look back on 2 or 3 of the ideas we had and think those would have been very successful. But so that is a regret. It's probably more to do with not understanding the power of purpose until I was a bit older.
I believe it's better late than never, and at least you did find your purpose, because sometimes there are some people that that live through life that never really tap into their purpose. So
no.
I think that it's wonderful that you have, and I think sometimes there's even myself. I probably wasn't aware of my purpose till much later on in life. I think it's one of those things you either do or you don't. I don't think that I look at it this way, that it comes to you at the right time.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are so many people who talk about purpose but can't articulate it.
Yes.
And I think I'm fond of saying to people in the work that I do, when you can say, I believe, ... and you do, it's incredible what you accomplish under that banner.
That's right. And when you're on purpose, this is what you came here to do.
Yeah.
It's just that innate feeling inside of you, that you are deeply fulfilled with what you do.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it can be a little bit dangerous, because I always say to myself, I am so passionate about what I do. I love what I do that I feel like I don't work a day in my life. But
and
you can see that's
wonderful.
It is wonderful, but the danger of that is you could work 16, 18, 20 hours. But yeah, it is. And that's when you're on purpose, because you are you're flowing through life.
Yes, absolutely.
So Sandy, what is the best piece of advice that you have ever been given?
I was given, and they go sort of hand in hand, so it's not a single piece of advice, it's 2 bits, by a mentor, a friend who was a mentor several years ago, possibly even 15 or 20 years ago. And he was an early adopter of change management in the days when, most people, if you'd said change management, wouldn't have had a clue what you were talking about. And he gave me these 2 tools. In fact, I met him recently and I reminded him, and he'd sort of forgotten about them, but I adopted them. And one was what I've come to, I've sort of created my own version of it, and I call it the Trust Monitor. And it's 5 tenets that you can measure, but on a measure of 0 to 10, as to whether a situation, a person, a quote, a proposal, a relationship, or any other thing has those qualities of trust that mean you should continue in the communication or the relationship. And it's based on competency, capability, transparency, disclosure, and inclusivity. And I've used it extensively in my life since then, and it's really helped enormously, especially in those situations where you just can't be sure why things aren't working the way they should. And it came hand in hand with a second piece of a second tool, which was essentially, it's called an apathy to commitment chart. And we were in a lot of client servicing in the days when there was a big transition, and very often we'd be putting forward great ideas to people and sensing that we weren't getting the kind of collaboration back that we really wanted to have to make this work. And part of this chart is just so good because it describes the person that's in a silo, that's apathy. That's the person who has a lot of knowledge but just operates in complete isolation. And the commitment one is the director role. That's the role where you do everything you possibly can in spite of everything else in life. You're just that committed. And sitting in between is compliance. And that's the person who sort of comes to work at 5 and at 8 and leaves at 5 and doesn't really contribute one way or another. But the two that I found really interesting, the one that's very interesting is the one that's called grudging compliance. And that's the person that says, yes, I'm going to do something, but they don't do it. And you end up micromanaging them. And there's such a huge waste of energy in that space because you'll never move them into commitment. And so if you're employing staff, those are the people you just have to let go. They may not be grudging with another employer or another role. So it's really understanding where your energy is. So it's a chart, I think, to understand what a lot of people know innately, but there's some situations where you just don't quite know what's going on. And this is a great tool to understand that.
So where would our listeners find a tool? Because I think that's amazing. I love the whole trust monitor and the apathy to commitment chart.
The trust monitor is on my website, my blog website, whyyoumustblog.com. And I haven't actually put the apathy chart up because I tend to roll that out with my clients. Right. But I have a feeling that it's probably in the public domain because it's not my own IP. Like a lot of the stuff, I've taken it and I've looked at it and then I've kind of realized it in my speak, if you like, in my language. But it's not, I didn't create it as a chart, but it was a brilliant piece of advice.
It is, and trust is such a big thing. I mean, we talk about it quite often. There's different ways you trust, and then there's such a variable in the word itself, trust. There's some people that just trust everybody until proven wrong. Some people don't trust anybody, and then others may think that trust needs to be earned. And then when you do trust someone, how much do you actually trust them?
Yes, and especially online, because so many people say to me, well, how do you build trust online? I mean, you don't even know these people. And it's not so much that you're judging them, it's that you are communicating in a way that you can tick those boxes up at the 10 mark. Because if you're doing that, then you're completely authentic and people will trust you, and they do.
Yeah, and I think people are switched on these days. I think they, innately, either just intuitively or just, I think customers nowadays are so much more savvy and so much more intuitive, and they'll know straight away whether they can trust you.
Yes, absolutely.
So, Sandy, what's the greatest lesson that you have ever learned?
It's such a big question, isn't it?
It is. There's so many lessons that we learn along the way.
I think it is honestly that nothing matters more than being present with those that you love in the space with them. That too often we get sidetracked by life and the vicissitudes of running our own businesses and the ups and downs that go with that. And so the really amazing things that are happening around us pass us by. And actually, I learnt that lesson from my younger daughter when she was getting married. Was probably at a time, a very dark time for us business-wise. And she said, I don't know how you're going to do this, but somehow you have to be in the moment of this experience of the wedding, because you will look back and say, when things have changed, because they will, you'll look back and say, I only had that one, she was only hopefully ever going to get married once. It was a one-off experience, and it was spoiled because I was so down and black about what was happening in our business. And I took that on board and worked really hard to make the experience and nothing to do with the business. And so I have wonderful memories of the lead up and the actual wedding day. And that was such a big lesson, because I could so easily have just been filtering all the misery through the back of my brain while this amazing experience was going on. And I've taken that lesson and tried to run with it ever since.
Wow, what amazing advice from your daughter. Very, very wise woman.
She's a wise young girl. I've got two very wise daughters. I'm very lucky.
Oh, no wonder where they get that from.
No, they've taught me a lot.
And they do, don't they? Children do.
Yeah.
They do
Yeah.
teach you. And being present, it's one of those things that sometimes it doesn't come easy. It's one of those things that you have to consciously make an effort and work at
Mm-hmm.
it. It's, and I think over time, it doesn't matter how much you practice it. I think that over time, you become more and more conscious of how often you're not present, because we get so caught up on external things and the business of life and technology that sometimes it's when you are present to stop and check in with yourself. It's quite powerful.
Yes, and you're so right. It's not innate. Well, it was not for me anyway. I've had to learn it, and I'd say I'm still learning it. But I do have some checks now that I didn't used to have in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it goes with me too. As much as I talk about it, I still myself are practicing it all the time.
Yes.
So what advice would you give your younger self?
I think probably to be more trusting of your good ideas, or at least, well, of course, I would say to my younger self, work hard to find out what your personal purpose is, or be aware of that. Purpose wasn't really a concept around when I was younger, but it's very much around for younger people today. And then check in with your purpose, check your ideas in with your purpose, filter your ideas, and if they tick the boxes, then have the courage to go with them. Back yourself, because one doesn't really want to have any regrets. And I'm a great believer in the fact that and that's partly about living in the moment too, that if we're living in the space of if only, we're stuck in the past, and that's doing us no good service at all. And if we're living in the space of what if, we're awfulizing about the future, and that's not doing us any good. So having a purpose kind of grounds you into right now, because the moment you marry an intention to a purpose, you only do the logical next steps that you need to do. So there's a whole clarity piece that sits around this. I guess that's the work I do. And I think that's what I'd be saying to my younger person. What a pity that you didn't have the knowledge to get clear on your purpose and trust your ideas when you were younger.
And I think that comes with age too. It's not
Yes.
till I think that, as we get older, we become more, the wise old owl. We become wiser. We can look back and see and take our learnings and embrace our learnings and know what we can and can't do moving forward. And I think that purpose is such a big thing, but then to understand at such a young age, I think that just comes with time.
It does. And there's no point in pushing that barrow if it's being met with any form of resistance. But
True.
I'm certainly talking to my daughters about it a lot.
That's amazing. And so what kind of conversations are they understanding what purpose is all about? Do they connect with it?
Yes, very much. That isn't to say that either of them at this stage would be able to articulate a purpose for their life's work, but they're much more tuned in to what that potential could be than perhaps I was at the same age. I mean, right at the moment, they're very invested in tiny babies, and that, as you know, it tends to take up a lot of energy. But both of them have a sort of a more worldly vision of the potential for where they could go, and that makes me feel that they will investigate their personal purpose when they're in a place where it's appropriate to do so.
I love the word investigate.
Yeah.
So, Sandy, who's been your greatest influence?
Oh, them, my husband and them, and these two babies. I know it sounds. I thought about the question, and I'd love to say, somebody like Nelson Mandela, who's a remarkable human being, and I admire him so enormously. But on a daily basis, the people that influence me, that make me think about who I am and what I am and where I'm going and why I should be doing it and is it meaningful, it's them, my immediate family, and my mother. She's been a great influence on me too.
Oh, look, I'm right there with you. I have the same thing. If somebody asks me that question, it's always been my family because they have my back
Yeah,
at all the time. My son, my husband, my mother, my family, they're always so supportive and they're an influence of me. They
yeah.
allow me to be who I am, and it's very empowering when you have that kind of support.
Oh, 100%. But they also are a good reality check. So they, they don't let me get too fanciful.
Yeah, I can relate to that one too.
Yeah.
They bring you back down to earth
Yeah.
every now and then.
Yes.
Yeah, especially when you go off, or especially me, I'm a bit of a creative spirit, and sometimes I go
Yeah.
off into the clouds with my ideas, and that's not till my husband brings me down to earth and really makes me look at it in a reality kind of way. So it's puts things into perspective, for that's for
Good
sure.
man.
Yes, yes. So Sandy, if you had to describe one word that describes your personal brand, what would that be?
I think it's got to be love of family. I know that's 3 words, so maybe I'll just say love. But they are the inspiration behind everything I do. So even the charity, what drove me in the end was I kept thinking of these children that didn't have a mother and a father. And that was such a driving force because I knew what my girls had. I knew what I had having them and now the grandchildren. And to think that there are these many millions of kids that don't have that was a big driver.
Obviously, and I think even just family. I mean, you are all about family,
Yeah.
children. Even your charity is all about children without
Yeah.
family.
Yeah.
It's just beautiful what you do. Just keep up with the amazing work.
Thank you.
So, Sandy, we always wrap up with 3 golden nuggets. So we always like to ask our beautiful guest speakers to come on and share 3 golden nuggets with our listeners. So what would be your 3 golden nuggets?
The first one is definitely to embrace the concept of clarity. It's not often tackled as a topic, which I find really surprising because so little of any worth can be achieved without it. And when you do find clarity, it's an elixir. It's very liberating to be super clear on what your purpose is, what your intention is for anything. Your business, your family, online, buying a house, it doesn't really matter. It's incredibly liberating to be clear because it stops the noise in your head. And the moment you stop swimming in your head, you are focused on what you need to do, and you only need to do those logical next steps. And if you've only got 8 hours in a day, you won't overimpose on yourself a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't actually just drive you to that one desired reality, whatever that is. So doing the hard work of clarity is definitely my first nugget. And the second one is to understand your principles. And I see principles as being quite different to values. In my world, they're the immutable laws that inform how you operate, how you show up in the world. And I think values dictate behavior, but principles are the operating framework for whatever you're doing. So, I mean, my first principle is clarity. So I can't do what I do with people, business owners, if I'm not taking them through a process of clarity. If you removed clarity out of my principle, those pillars that support my purpose, I just wouldn't be able to do what I do. So when you do find your principles, a remarkable thing happens. You identify your key messages. And again, I'm talking business here, but it actually cuts across anything. It could cut across parenting, being on a board it could cut across anything. And in identifying the key messages, you also begin to unearth the stories that support the key messages. So your communications become so much clearer when you understand your principles. And the third one is curiosity. I have a friend who told me once that great leaders are in relentless pursuit of their truth. And I just found that an extraordinary line. It sort of sat with me. I thought how hard it is to be in relentless pursuit of your truth. But I think if you're curious and you keep asking why and you keep searching, you are in relentless pursuit of your truth. And when you're in relentless pursuit of your truth, you will unearth your purpose. You will find what your principles are. You will understand what the stories are that support all of that. And you will better serve the world as a result of that, whatever that world is for you. It might be your family, your clients, the charity, whatever you're doing, you will better serve it by having gone through that process.
Wow, Sandy, they're amazing golden nuggets. And I love the whole principles. I mean, I look at principles as almost like universal laws, as very much your foundation. And it's very true. They are your pillars and your foundation that drive you and drive even your values and your decisions and what you do.
Yes, absolutely.
I love it. Fantastic. So, Sandy, how do our listeners find you?
Well, they can find me on my website, which is getitrightonline.com. And they can certainly find me on my blog. So I have a blog that sort of sits separately because I'd started the blog way, way before I developed my business. And I decided that they were sympathetic to each other. And I actually love my blog, Why You Must Blog, because that's probably where I can just be my most authentic self and share ideas with the world. And also I have a Facebook page that's Why You Must Blog, and a whole lot of other social media bits and pieces, but those are probably the three areas, and LinkedIn, of course.
Sandy, what an inspirational woman you are. It's been an absolute honour and a pleasure listening to your stories and amazing advice as well. Like the 3 golden nuggets, just amazing.
Thank you.
I love everything about you. And look, keep up with the great work, and you're doing amazing things. So thank you so much for your time and your energy, and I look forward to speaking with you more.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm just really excited to be part of your project.
Thank you. We're the ones that are. It's an honour to have you on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
You too.
Bye.
That brings us to the end of another episode. I hope you enjoyed the show, as it is my mission to reach out and inspire as many individuals like you. And one of the best ways to help us achieve this goal is by giving us a good review on iTunes. It's easy and it only takes about 10 seconds. If you have any questions or special guests that you would like to hear from, please send us an email to support@catherineplano.com.au and we will get right back to you. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter or Facebook @Catherine Plano. That's it for now. Thanks for listening. Until next week, please take care.